Negativity sells, especially on the internet. I know if I stood here and called all Trump supporters racist, homophobic, pussy-grabbing, Fox News brainwashed, non-educated, Trump that bitch t-shirt wearing, Confederate flag tattoo having, gullible conspiracy theory believing assholes pretending to be smart while they're really just regurgitating Rush Limbaugh talking points, this video might go viral. I also know if I called all Hillary supporters pantsuit wearing, tree hugging, abortion having, welfare abusing, war on Christmas waging, safe space needing, buttercup, libtard, snowflake cupcakes with Rachel Maddow haircuts and a shelf full of participation trophies, this video might go viral. But like Booker T. Washington said, I refuse to let any man drag me so low as to make me hate him. What's up? I'm Anthony. I've spent the last year absolutely fascinated with this presidential election. From the primary races, which saw Donald Trump come from nowhere to beat 16 other Republican candidates, to Hillary Clinton and her all but guaranteed cakewalk to the presidency, which never came to be. The whole process has been incredible, unbelievable. Now, I know politics can be divisive, but if you're taking the time to listen to this, know that regardless of your political stance, I respect you and I appreciate your time. Today, I'm going to break down what the hell just happened, the exact set of conditions that led to a Donald Trump presidency, and how we can center ourselves and move forward in 2017. It's the election episode. Everything connects. Let's go. Donald Trump's election win became official last week when the Electoral College confirmed his victory. Responses across the country have ranged from protests to parades, tears of joy to tears of fear and disbelief. The divisive energy present throughout the campaign process has only magnified in the time since, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that I can't remember in my lifetime such hatred and disdain between opposing parties. But why? It's tough to be politically informed without developing certain prejudices and biases. Of course, we can't see these blind spots in ourselves that limit our understanding when we're in attack mode or defense mode for that matter. It's only when we allow a certain degree of separation between ourselves and our politics that we can be objective, we can use critical thinking, and we can be receptive to new information. Otherwise, everybody is defending what they already believe, and nobody is listening, expanding, growing. So I'm going to break down the 2016 election as objectively as I can. I ask that you hear me out with an open mind, and then feel free to leave your own input, which is always welcome. Comment below or leave a message anytime, day or night, at the Everything Connects comment line, area code 512-635-7365. I guess the best question to start with when breaking down this election is, did Trump win or did Hillary lose? And the answer, as best as I can see, is both. This election was comprised of so many layers and intricacies, it can be hard to untangle all the elements and see how everything connects. On so many levels, the whole thing was just a big ball of confusion. So I'm going to unravel all the strings and lay them out in a way that allows us to understand what happened. Here are, as best as I could identify them, the 12 factors that led us to a Donald Trump presidency. Let's break them down. We'll start with what I call the political pendulum. If you look at the history of this country and how we elect our presidents, you'll see a pattern that's very much like a pendulum. Political power tends to swing back and forth between the two parties. It's not often that either party holds the presidency for more than 2 consecutive terms. It's much more likely that after a term or 2 of one party, the pendulum swings back to the other party, which makes sense because no policy or set of policies can serve everyone's interests, right? No matter how good things are for some people in the country, there will always be others who aren't happy and want change. This same pendulum effect was a key factor in what allowed President Obama to win office following 8 years of the Republican George Bush, who won office after 8 years of the Democrat Bill Clinton. In politics, as in life, timing is huge. Would the Democrat President Obama have won were he following 8 years of the Democrat Bill Clinton? No way. But after 8 extremely rough years of the Republican George Bush, people were so ready for change, they elected a black guy with the middle name Hussein. Knowing this, it makes sense that before this election's candidates were even identified, the Republican nominee, whoever it would have a good chance of winning. So it ended up being the last 8 years of Obama versus the change of Donald Trump. And the two couldn't be more different. Let's look at it like both were rappers. Obama would be early Nas. He's over here. Something you got to sit down and really listen to. You might have to rewind a part of the song 4 or 5 times to really fully understand what he's saying. Trump, he's way over here. He's loud. He's abrasive. He's more like Lil Jon. Also successful and had a huge movement, but different. He's screaming. He got the crowd crunk. And his message might not be but 2 phrases, but damn it, you know what they are. Wall, jail. Wall, jail. We gonna be great again. What? Great again. What? Trump is the Little John of politics. You're not proud you listen to it. You're not intellectually stimulated by it. But the hook is kind of catchy. Trump got housewives walking through the store like, wall, jail. I like that. I can get behind that. Politics is both complicated and boring, honestly. The content is dry, the concepts are long and multifaceted, and the language can be intimidating in how rigid and formal it is. Nobody likes to hear someone talk when they don't understand what's being said. Trump broadened the scope of people interested in this election by dumbing down the language, way down. Now, please don't hear something I'm not saying. I'm not saying you're dumb if you voted for Trump. But my point remains the same. The language and rhetoric that Trump established from the beginning of his campaign dumbed down the election in a way that we'd never seen before. And for a good part of the year, this had the Republican Party off balance. See, if you just started watching the election late, you might think Trump was just the unanimous Republican nominee and that all Republicans loved him. But that couldn't be further from the truth. The Republican establishment hated Donald Trump from the start of his campaign. They felt he took away from the legitimacy and seriousness of their party. They saw him as a bozo, a crude loudmouth who undermined the dignity and pride of the GOP. Because of this, many Republicans and prominent conservatives started a movement called Never Trump. It was a coordinated effort to make sure that anybody besides Trump was the party's nominee. But they underestimated the power of Trump's dumb down. Instead of boring, detailed policy, he used simple words and vague catchphrases that didn't require an in-depth understanding of politics to get behind. Build that wall. Lock her up. This dumbed-down approach alarmed Republicans who were starting to see Trump get more attention than other composed contenders. Serious contenders. Preferred contenders. While the party's young darlings like Marco Rubio were practicing appearing presidential, Trump made fun of the way people looked. He called people names. And to the shock and horror of Republican leaders, he was starting to convince a growing number of Americans that anybody who opposed him was a loser. The next factor in Trump's win, news as entertainment and the chase for ratings. The news landscape has changed dramatically in our lifetimes. Thanks to cable news networks and the internet, there's now a 24/7 news cycle, and it's always in need of a catchy segment. The hunt for headlines never sleeps, and competition for viewers is fierce. Stories that highlight sensationalism, shock, and conflict are at an all-time premium. When the Republican Party rolled out its field of candidates, the only person on it with any real pop was Trump. I looked at the list like, never heard of him. Jeb? Oh shit, George Bush's little brother? Hell no. Who's this sleepy ass looking dude? Ben Carson, neurosurgeon. That piqued my interest. I gave it a shot and watched him talk. I think dude fell asleep during his own damn speech. The media had no choice. Of course they flocked to the orange reality TV star with the bad hair and who was treating the debate stage like a Comedy Central roast. He was on fire. He was politically incorrect, and the inappropriate comments and unapologetic honesty that he had people all over the country asking each other, did you hear what Trump said? The formula was set. Donald Trump equaled ratings. Even non-political shows found themselves leading segment after segment with all things Trump. And it was entertaining. It was attention grabbing. And it was harmless, right? I mean, there was no reason to spend a lot of time fact checking the things that he said or tweeted, because all serious politicians and pundits agreed that although his cartoonish shtick was fun to mock, he stood no real chance of becoming the president of the United States, right? The networks decided to milk the Trump show for all it was worth. They put him on the air unchecked, and they kept him on the air, and the ratings rolled in. Trump became a legitimate option for many moderate voters when he sharpened his ability to cast himself as anti-establishment. Regardless of party affiliation, millions of Americans see the government as generally ineffective, agreeing across party lines that almost everything the government tries to do moves too slow and costs too much. Years of partisan gridlock have only added to voter frustration. Citizens were feeling marginalized by highly educated, elitist politicians and were ready to shake up the system and the status quo in Washington. Now, Trump had never held any sort of elected official position. None. But he had built up a billion-dollar name association. He sold himself as the best candidate for the Republican Party, not because he had political experience, but because he was a winner. He was rich, he was married to a model, and he was famous. And he was running against guys like Mike Huckabee, author of the book God, Guns, Grits, and Gravy. No offense to you Mike Huckabee fans out there, but I doubt anyone read God, Guns, Grits, and Gravy and thought, you know, this guy should be president. Trump sold his political inexperience as a plus. How? He convinced people you have to be a smarter leader to be successful in the fast-paced, cutthroat world of private business. He said he wanted to run the country like a successful business. The tone struck a serious chord with voters, and it was a song that nobody but Trump could play. He offered himself as a candidate who was free of political debt and who was capable of freeing Washington from the ineffective bureaucracy that cripples government efficiency. Now, I watched this thing close, and to me, Trump's biggest anti-establishment boost came when he publicly pointed out what many of us privately felt, which is that special interest groups and lobbyists, big money, are the real puppet masters behind our politicians. They prop up candidates with huge contributions, but behind closed doors, they're the ones ultimately pulling the strings. Being independently wealthy, Trump vowed that he wasn't susceptible to the temptations of big money influence, taking the stance that he, unlike his opponents, could not be bought. The message resonated with Democrats, Republicans, and independents. It was at that point, as the saying goes, shit got real. Trump might just have an angle to the White House, especially when you consider that the eventual Democratic nominee, Hillary Clinton, was synonymous with the term establishment. Meanwhile, on the Democratic side of the election, Hillary Clinton was supposed to be the clear-cut successor to President Obama. She'd been the first lady, a senator, secretary of state, and before one primary vote was even cast, she had hundreds of pledged delegates. Being the favorite here wasn't a new position for Hillary. Remember, in 2008, she was the heavy favorite to be the Democratic nominee, but she was blindsided and upset by a young Barack Obama. Now, 8 years later, and feeling like she'd more than waited her turn, she was ready to sit in the big chair. Except it was deja vu all over again. She found herself stuck in a primary election battle, unable to put away an underdog, this time Bernie Sanders. Now, Hillary had two problems. One, Bernie wouldn't go away. He was drawing massive crowds and was stealing hearts from voters all across the country. Two, the Republican Party had known for months, years really, that Hillary was going to be their next election opponent, which allowed them to run their campaign strategies against her before the primaries were even finished. Now, their two big strategies of attack were to focus on emails and Benghazi, and both fit under a broader bipartisan concern of national security and trustworthiness. Granted, multiple investigations had produced no charges against her, but in the court of public opinion, significant damage had been done to the already polarizing political name of Clinton. People were leery of the idea of another Clinton scandal headed toward the White House. You remember the shit Bill was up to. And I guess she had a third problem too, which was her face. And, and I don't mean that like when Trump calls a woman a six. I mean her expressions. All throughout the election process, she kept having this weird ass plastic smile plastered on her face. And it creeped people out. I was watching her debate, and my own children, who were 8 and 6, both asked me once, why is she smiling like that? And I know what it was. Her researchers gathered this data and came back to her like, Hillary, we ran the numbers. People think you look like a bitch. You gotta smile more, Hillary. More. And that's part of that misogynistic double standard of today's society, right? Women gotta smile or else they look like a bitch. But we don't demand that men smile. Ladies, don't let society pressure you into walking around smiling for no damn reason. You look crazy. And she shouldn't have been smiling. I mean, think about it. She's running for president in 2016. Half the country hates the other half of the country. People don't trust the police, and the police damn sure don't trust the people. ISIS is trying to blow this bitch sky high, but then again, not all Muslims are terrorists. Everybody needs health insurance, but nobody's happy with their health insurance. On top of that, her political opponents have been running a smear campaign against her for the last 2 years, and Bill's sitting up in the stands winking at bitches. Fuck should she be smiling for? But you saw her in the debates. Hillary Clinton created ISIS. That's not true. Campaign managers like, perfect, Hillary. Now act like they dropped a bunch of balloons. What? People sitting at home watching like, Jesus Christ, what is she hiding? Did you see her face when they dropped those balloons? It had me sounding like a conspiracy theorist. I was sitting at home like, that's a clone. I ain't no real person. Real people don't do that. So Hillary had those problems, but then the hack happened. Email communications were hacked from the Democratic National Committee and were starting to be released. In an alarming twist to millions of registered Democrats, communications between DNC officials appeared to be showing the party rigging the election against Bernie Sanders. When Hillary was officially declared the winner and the party's nominee, it sent many Bernie supporters into full kamikaze mode, vowing to never support Hillary, regardless of how it affected the general election. They felt like the DNC basically played chicken with their vote, telling Sanders supporters, we don't care if you want Bernie. You're getting Hillary. And you're going to vote for her, too. What are you going to do? Let Trump win? Journalist Walter Lippmann once famously said, the news and the truth are not the same thing. Gone are the days of strictly objective fact reporting. Now consumers want their news cut and tailored to fit their particular beliefs. The market for it is huge too. And in America, no matter what the product is, if somebody's willing to buy, somebody else would be willing to sell. Want to hear about how it'll send the country back into the 1950s by voting for any of these right-wing nut jobs? Go on over to MSNBC. Want to be convinced that the country is on the brink of destruction and will fall like Rome if we elect another communist Democrat? Hop on over to Fox. News programming is becoming literally that, news programming. Networks influence their audience by both how they cover stories and also by cherry picking which stories they choose to cover at all. Example, CNN recently ran a story about a Muslim woman in New York assaulted by some Trump supporters. They ripped off her religious headdress, shouted racial vulgarities at her. They had her scared for her life. I didn't see that story on Fox News once. Until, that is, it came out that she lied. She made the whole thing up. Now, as you can imagine, I've seen that part of the story running on the Fox internet site with regular consistency. See? All these race baiters, they're lying, see? These networks aren't dumb. They know where their bread is buttered. They know their regular viewers aren't tuning in to hear things that challenge what they already believe. They want their beliefs reinforced with a story or two that allows them to look at their family and say, see, told you. And this slant goes both ways. I recently read about a white male firefighter in New York State whose home was maliciously burned down by Black Lives Matter supporters. Now this is the type story Fox can't wait to run with. CNN, not so much. The attackers even left behind the phrase, lay with pigs, fry like bacon, making the connection that firefighters, because of their proximity to police officers as public servants, are just as despicable as cops. And Black Lives Matter is proving to be an official hate group set on destroying all things good in America. Conservative outlets jumped on it, and it wasn't just Fox. Websites like Blue Lives Matter, freedomdaily.com all ran with the story. The comments left by the readers were filled with hate disguised as righteous indignation. More than one commenter echoing, "This is exactly why we need Trump." Except this story wasn't true either. Investigators determined the man set his own house on fire and wrote the disturbing message himself. The whole thing was a lie. Has this race-baiting story been exposed on Fox News the same way the Muslim woman who made up her story's been? Of course not. Are left and right-leaning outlets ever going to cover the same news story with just objective facts? Not anymore. Not unless we, the American news consumer, demands it and stops buying slant. If we stop buying, they will stop selling. But until that day comes, if you really want to be informed, you have to diversify your news source. If you don't, you end up living in an information bubble and become highly susceptible to manipulation. As if sifting our way through all this slanted media wasn't challenging enough, now there's an even trickier obstacle to navigate. Did you hear about the Pope officially endorsing Donald Trump? Millions of people did. Did you hear about President Obama's plan to declare martial law and refuse to leave the White House? How about the FBI agent who was all set to spill the beans on Hillary, who suddenly turned up dead in a mysterious murder-suicide? I read that article in the Denver Guardian. The only problem is there is no Denver Guardian. It's a fake name, used as a fake source in a fake article that circulated around the internet. Fake news. You've probably heard that term a lot since the election. Fake news is exactly as it sounds. News stories that are totally made up. Fake news is like the bastard child of news as entertainment and slanted news. And believe it or not, multiple reports have shown that on Facebook in the time leading up to the election, fake news articles were liked, shared, or commented on more than legitimate news articles. Trump himself has fallen into the fake news trap multiple times, once causing him to tweet out crime statistics that were horribly inaccurate and pinned crime on blacks at a rate that was outrageously wrong. It wasn't until after he tweeted these figures out to millions of people that someone pointed out to him this was originally posted as a racist neo-Nazi propaganda piece. His defense? Hey, all I did was retweet it. One fake news story that directly impacted this election was dubbed Pizzagate. Pizzagate was a theory, spread online, that hacked DNC emails spoke in code about a secret underground child sex trafficking ring run out of a pizza place in Washington, D.C. It claimed Hillary Clinton and other Democratic officials are high-level Satanists who sexually abuse young children before killing them in sacrifice. It sounds crazy, right? But a man from North Carolina, after reading about this, not only decided to vote against Hillary, he grabbed 3 different guns and hopped in his truck. Fueled by this story, he charged into the restaurant and fired a shot while inside the crowded building. Fortunately, he didn't kill anybody. After he was taken into custody, a thorough search of the place showed no signs of anything even remotely close to what that guy was talking about. But the damage had been done to the business, to the patrons, and to this man's life, who no doubt found his world turned upside down when he learned there were no children needing to be saved. That's the danger of fake news. It plays on people's emotions. And because it's absolutely made up, the creators have no responsibility. They have no journalistic integrity to protect. They're just screwing around, seeing who they can get to believe their shit. And to muddy it up even more, not all creators of fake news have malicious intent. Some are people trying to advance a certain political agenda, sure, or to profit from ad share revenues. But some fake news stories were actually written as satire pieces, sarcasm. They're jokes that end up being taken seriously and spread around as real news. So, given this steady attack of disinformation people find themselves under, it's no wonder that we're entering what's called a post-truth world in politics. Oxford Dictionary actually listed post-truth as their word of the year. Post-truth refers to when facts, objective facts, are less important than emotion and belief. An example may sound something like this. Obama hadn't done one good thing for this country. Name one. Well, you may not like him, but you can't argue that he's led the country out of one of its worst recessions into 69 consecutive months of job growth. He saved over 1.5 million auto industry jobs, and he's more than doubled the Dow Jones, which has strengthened people's savings, retirement funds, and college funds. He didn't do shit. I feel this post-truth phenomena is a direct result of biased news and fake news. With the constant onslaught of news, points, counterpoints, counterpoints, trying to get a little taste of what's happening in the world can be like drinking from a fire hose. So what people end up doing is forming an opinion and sticking to that opinion, regardless of what new information is presented to them. In the weeks leading up to the election, the Clinton campaign was pretty sure it had victory sewn up. She was ahead in the polls, some by slim margins, others by gaping estimates of up to 11 points. But it seemed to most of us from a distance that she was going to win. However, some Clinton staffers on the ground in key battleground states like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania were seeing something different. They were panicking as the campaign cut back on spending and advertising in the states. Some of these key voters were starting to feel as if their vote was being taken for granted, and they didn't like it. Keep in mind, a large group of these people already felt abandoned by the Democratic Party in general, who seemed to lose their ability to represent the working class. This key demographic was starting to feel invisible politically. Some of them frustrated enough to start thinking, hell, maybe I'll give Trump a shot. Meanwhile, staffers on the ground saw the light of her imminent victory dimming, and they set up warning flares, desperately asking for help. Those flares, for the most part, were ignored. Was it neglect? Was it arrogance? Was it overconfidence? I don't know. But the response from the Clinton campaign almost echoed the DNC's response to angry Bernie supporters who threatened to not back Hillary in the general election. Meh. What are they going to do? Let Trump win? Every presidential election cycle, candidates talk about immigration. It's an issue that never fully goes away. Normally, illegal immigration arguments are pointed at Mexicans illegally coming into America and taking away jobs, benefits, etc. Both parties do a little song and dance about border security, and nothing much comes of it. But this election, due to jihadist terror attacks happening all over the world, the immigration issue took on an ominously different tone. Trump's initial build that wall rhetoric was seen by most Americans early as a stunt aimed at uninformed voters looking to scapegoat immigrants for their financial hardships. But then, it was around this time last year, Saeed Farook, a radicalized Muslim in California, shot and killed 14. Terror struck again in Florida when Omar Mir Saeed Mateen killed 49 people in the deadliest single-shooter event in American history. He identified himself as Mujahideen, meaning an Islamic guerrilla fighter fighting against non-Muslim forces. Europe's been having their own immigration concerns about Islamic terrorism. This summer in Germany, an Afghani refugee critically wounded a woman by chopping her in the face with an axe while yelling Allahu Akbar. He injured 5 others. Within that same week in Germany, a suicide bomber also struck. In July of this year, an Islamic jihadist in France, and I'm sure you've heard about this, drove a 19-ton cargo truck through scores of people gathered for Nice's Bastille Day celebration, killing over 80 and injuring hundreds. Just weeks ago, Abdul Razak Ali Artan drove his car into a crowd of people at Ohio State before jumping out and slashing people with a knife, hospitalizing 11. Last week in Germany, a terrorist smashed a truck through the famous Christmas market in Berlin, killing 12 and injuring almost 50. These are just a few in a long list of terror attacks that took place during the campaign. Trump's cheesy wall slogan was suddenly underlying a serious concern that all Americans were thinking about in one way or another: national security. The same concern the Republican Party was able to highlight regarding Hillary Clinton's emails: national security. So let's go back to the political pendulum that we talked about. The left-leaning political reaction to Islamic terrorism tends to be, not all Muslims are terrorists, or Christians kill people too. And they're true, but those responses infuriate people who feel politicians are now sacrificing the safety of American lives out of fear of appearing intolerant. So what's the right answer? A wall? A ban? Bombs? Will that make things better or worse? I don't know. What I do know is terror attacks played a significant role in certain people's support of Donald Trump. Even some people who were turned off by Trump's personal behavior were willing to say, look, the guy's an asshole, but if he can help ensure the safety of Americans. The phrase October surprise relates to new information that can spring up right before the election that has the potential to sway voters. Trump's pussy grab incident was his late trip up, but unbelievably to some, it didn't hurt his campaign, which, if you think about it, makes sense. It surprised me too, but I thought about it. As I explained during the Dumb Down segment, his whole campaign was crude and unrefined. He trash-talked people, he mocked the handicapped man, he insulted veterans on both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republican. The man literally stood on the debate stage and insinuated that he has a big dick. So to envision him grabbing at women's vaginas, although disgusting, wasn't inconsistent with his character. I think the most interesting thing about that whole tape debacle was that the guy he was talking to, that guy got fired. So Trump grabs the pussy, he tells the guy laughs, the guy gets fired, and Trump gets elected president. God bless America. Hey, speaking of tapes coming out, I'm going to interject something here. There's going to be a tape coming out. I don't know when, but it's going to come out. It's outtakes and behind the scenes stuff from The Apprentice, the show that Donald Trump was on. In these tapes, Trump refers to black people as, you guessed it, niggers. Now, I know for a small amount of his voters, had they heard that tape before the election, there's no way they would have voted for him. No way. But I also know that for some people, hearing Trump refer to black people as niggers would not have been a deal breaker. So I'm going to give you a free bit of advice because the tapes will eventually come out. And when they do, if you would have heard those tapes and voted for him anyway, lie about it. Lie your ass off. Act surprised. What? He said nigger. Well, that's a crying shame. That's a politically incorrect. Resist the urge to say things like, well, black people say it. Don't go there. You've never said anything wrong. Don't do it. I'm more offended by what she's done than what he said. Trust me, the minorities in this country, we know you would have voted for him anyway. So just respect us enough to look us in the face and lie. Please and thank you. As for Hillary's October surprise, it did hurt her. Just days before the election, FBI Director James Comey released a letter informing the world that the FBI would be re-examining her email situation. In a neck-and-neck race where she was stalling and Trump was surging, this was one last hurdle that she absolutely did not need. That, coupled with the news that many people's health insurance premiums would be going up again next year, may have been the straw that finally broke her campaign's back. So I started this presentation with what I call the political pendulum, and I'll end it with what I call the progressive pendulum. Fair warning, I'm going to talk about race a bit here. I know you don't want to hear it, Some of you like, here we go again. Everything's always got to be about race. I feel you. And I promise I'm going to break it down in a way that you probably haven't heard before. And as a person who spent 40 years in America being both black and white, I feel I'm uniquely qualified on the subject. So bear with me because it really does all connect. The history of the United States, the country that we all love, was founded on slavery. Absolute inequality. The pendulum was held in this particular position for hundreds of years. That's a lot of stored energy. In 1865, we came to the understanding that if we really believe all men are created equal, the pendulum should be balanced here in the middle. So we released the ball. America ends slavery. The problem is when you release a pendulum, it doesn't just come to the middle and stop. That's not how energy works, whether you're talking about mechanical energy or the energy between people or groups of people. So the pendulum swings. We're free. And I say we because although I'm mixed, in slave days, my ass would have been out there working just like any other slave. It's not like I would have got the weekends off. So we're free. We're learning to read. We're learning to be strong families again after being torn apart for generations. We already know how to work. Hell, we've been doing all the work anyway. Now we're about to get paid. Oh, shit. It's fun to be popping. Right? But these newfound freedoms were in such contrast with the conditions of slavery, separation, and non-equality that America had become accustomed to. It didn't take long until systemic roadblocks were put in place to pull the pendulum back this way. And that began the swing of the progressive pendulum. This way and this way. This way. Follow me. Slavery, the Civil War and the Emancipation, lynching and Jim Crow and segregation, voting rights and civil rights, the weaponization of the criminal justice system, affirmative action. I'm going to pause here because affirmative action is a critical turning point in this progressive pendulum that led us to President Trump. Affirmative action is defined as laws or guidelines intended to end or correct the effects of discrimination. So affirmative action was basically an effort to get the pendulum back to the middle by nullifying unfairly gained advantages white men had over other minority groups. And this was a huge shift with long-lasting racial impacts that still affect us today. For the first time in the history of our country, systemic changes were implemented that put being white at a disadvantage. That changed things. Not to say that whites were deprived of an opportunity at a level even remotely comparable to that which Black Americans had suffered for generations, but suddenly on job applications, certain standardized tests, college applications, etc., in many cases, it was now an advantage to be Black. And in lots of people, this planted deep seeds of resentment and anger. Chris Rock has a brilliant line about affirmative action where he says, I don't think I should get a job or a promotion over a white guy if he gets a better score on a test than me. But if it's a tie, fuck him. Shit, you had a 400-year head start. But lots of white people disliked affirmative action, which I can understand. I mean, you and I are looking at this in a historical context, the big picture, with the understanding that everything connects. But to the white men first experiencing this affirmative action, such as quotas for hiring people of color, they saw it as an injustice, and they saw Black people as being hypocritical for supporting it. Their argument against it was, you say you want equality, but this isn't equality. You're getting an advantage because of your race. The thing you just said you hated. So do you hate racial inequality, or do you only hate it when it works against you? And there's a lot of logic to that argument. Again, you and I can understand that in order for the pendulum to be balanced in the middle, we have to overcorrect a bit for all the time it spent all the way over here. But I could also see how people living through it at the time felt they were being punished for something that they had nothing to do with. They had never owned slaves. They had never denied anybody the right to vote or the right to pursue their own idea of happiness. So something about affirmative action didn't seem right. But then again, in the proper context, it didn't seem wrong either. It seemed politically correct. And with that, we enter a new area on the progressive pendulum, political correctness. A phase in American history where the traditionally powerful, the straight white society, started policing themselves to the sensitivities of minority groups. Equal opportunity and cultural sensitivity training were mandated in workplaces. The fear of being reported to HR changed the atmosphere in jobs all across the country. Women, minorities, people of all different ethnicities, faiths, non-faiths, sexual orientations were all pushing to be respected equally. And the initial push for political correctness was well-intentioned and needed. Society should frown on racist behavior and insensitive comments and harassing gays and all the ugly parts of American culture that were the norm not long ago. But over the years, as America's been trying to find her balance with all these considerations, the pendulum may have swung a bit too far this way. Now many people feel political correctness has run amok. Everybody's offended by everything, and because of the internet, everybody has a voice to complain. So now the pendulum has shifted all the way over here, and the recoil's about to be massive. But before it breaks back the other way, we give it one last shove in the form of the weaponization of the term racist. Racism is bad, we all agree. But we've gone from trying to snuff out racism in order to ensure equality for all American citizens to threatening to brand any and everybody with that shameful racist scarlet R. Did you hear about so-and-so? Racist. I never would have guessed. His whole fantasy team is black. I guess he does draft Jason Witten every year. It's too much. And to the credit of most white Americans, to be considered a racist today is a disgrace. Are there racist people? Sure. But we've gone so far with political correctness that anything can be twisted and manipulated into appearing racist. And the media doesn't help because boy, does racism sell. Headlines, television coverage, the way stuff is worded, it's subtle, but pay attention. You'll see what I'm talking about. And outlets aren't doing this to combat racism. They're doing it to get eyeballs on their program. They're chasing the dollar. And flame-throwing everything as racist only prevents open and honest communications between black and white people about real race-related issues. Because most decent white Americans are terrified to have a discussion with us about anything racial because they don't want to say the wrong thing and be labeled a racist. And the real irony about that is calling someone a racist only offends them if they're not racist, because a real racist doesn't give a shit. So what's the point? So let's tie this all together. You have the political pendulum. It's pulled all the way over here to the left. We've had 8 years of a black Democratic president who's been painted by SlantED News as the worst president in American history, a socialist, a communist, anti-American Muslim set out to destroy America from the inside out, right? You've got dumbed down political language in a post-fact era where fake news has some people legitimately believing one of the candidates is a satanic child eater. You have a tired political name in Clinton who can't get out from under the stack of deleted emails. On top of that, Meemaw is convinced she's no longer allowed to say Merry Christmas. Can she say Merry Christmas? Of course she can. But if she thinks she can't, then the war on Christmas is real to her, and don't fuck with Meemaw's Christmas. On top of that, you have this progressive social pendulum also cranked all the way over here to the left, with a body of Americans who are tired of being called racist, tired of feeling there's a double standard for what's acceptable for them versus other groups, tired of feeling that political correctness is being forced on them, sprinkle in some outrageous healthcare premiums. Now we're asking the country to vote for a woman. This woman? Nope. The pendulum broke. And with all that momentum behind it, it blew right past the middle. It blew right past any chance that any moderate might have had, like a John Kasich standing there trying to talk about issues. He never stood a chance. It went all the way out here, even past the far right, like Ted Cruz. It went off the charts. And here we are. Donald Trump. Somewhere in that progressive pendulum factor is the phenomena that social psychologists such as Malcolm Gladwell describe as moral licensing. The idea behind moral licensing is that when a person makes a decision that they see as moral or upstanding, they have proven to themselves that they are a good person. Having proven that, when it's time to make another decision, they give themselves more leeway to choose freely. Think about it the way you do food. After a few days of eating healthy and proving your discipline and control, you'll indulge in a special treat. And you should, right? You've earned it. In this election, there was a significant number of voters who voted for President Obama in 2008-2012, who now voted for Trump. Obama to Trump. It left a lot of political analysts scratching their head asking, how could you vote for Obama and then vote for Trump? Moral licensing. These people had just spent 8 years eating their vegetables. Now they wanted a piece of cake. So that was the election. Well, that was the voting. And it brings us to the very last factor of a Trump presidency, the Electoral College. The election is over. The votes are counted. The numbers are in. Hillary Clinton beats Donald Trump by over 2.8 million votes and wins the 2016 presidential election. Except she lost. She won, but she lost. As I said earlier, politics are complicated. We like to say America's a democracy, but contrary to popular belief, it's not a straight democracy. It's more of a democratic republic. There are facets of government, state, local, and national, that are run like a true democracy, majority rule. For example, electing state governors. You get the most votes, you win. Easy. However, as we were all recently reminded, our presidential elections are not run that way. They're run through selected representatives in the Electoral College, and it's these electors who actually determine who wins the presidency. So how did this come to be? Let's talk about it. Some defenders of the Electoral College system have argued, well, if you went by just the popular vote, then the big states would determine the presidency every time. Candidates could just spend their time campaigning there and could ignore large parts of the country, which is a legitimate argument. I've read analysis on how the Electoral College makes it tougher to rig elections, and it takes into account rural versus urban concerns and more. But none of those were the key reasons the founding fathers structured the Electoral College system the way they did. See, in 1787, the concern of who had political power wasn't between big cities or small cities, or farmers versus city dwellers. The concern of power was between free states and slave states. With the North being free and the South having slaves, the South opposed the popular vote system, knowing they could never win since hundreds of thousands of people living in the South were slaves who couldn't vote. So they agreed upon a system, this Electoral College system, where each state would be awarded a certain amount of Electoral College votes based on population. Here's the thing. The South wanted their slaves tallied into their population totals, which would make sense for them as it would give them more political power. But of course, the North said, no, dude, we're not going to count your slaves. So they struck a deal. Slaves would be counted, but only as 3/5 of a person. This is our history. So regardless of who you voted for, you have to admit it is a little ironic that the Electoral College, which was set up to tilt political power toward institutional racism, just awarded the presidency to a man who many people call a blatant racist, a man who the majority of Americans did not vote for. Am I saying Trump won the presidency because of slavery? Of course not. But it is interesting. With his win now official, President-elect Trump is being protested and rejected in a way that I've never seen before. The Trump team is even having a hard time finding talent willing to perform at his inauguration ceremony. Some short-sighted analysts are blaming this rejection on people being sore losers or crybabies, but I don't think they really understand what's happening. Trump isn't being rejected because of policy. He's being rejected because of decency. People aren't protesting a Republican president. American political leadership always ebbs and flows between the parties. We talked about that earlier. They're protesting him, the man, his character. People are making fun of him, calling him names, questioning his intelligence, insulting the way he looks. They're giving him the business. But if you were paying attention to the way he ran his campaign, you knew he'd be treated like this. Because you know, like I know, everything connects. My friends, just like 2016, this election is over. It's time for me to get back to being centered. It's time for us to get back to being at peace with ourselves and each other. I encourage you to remember, as you move forward into this new year and new national leadership, the outside world will always want to manipulate your feelings and emotions. This, if you allow it, in turn, manipulates the way you think, which determines the reality you see and experience. So if you're feeling worked up after this emotionally draining process, unplug for a bit. Turn off your phone, turn off your computer, turn off the television. Shift your focus away. Shift your focus onto radiating love and kindness from the inside out, and watch how it affects the world around you. Thanks for your time. I'll talk to y'all soon. And if you take anything away from this video, let it be these two things. Everything connects. Love and respect.